Welcome back to Woman, Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda. And we are recording our conversations across racial lines about sensitive topics on purpose to give our viewers a chance to hear various points of view and also to encourage you to do your own conversations across racial lines on these same or similar topics.
Yes.
This
And
evening's
today's topic, voter suppression. And I don't think, Linda, people recognize the history and how far we are not removed from voter suppression. And the reason I say that is my mother, I was born in 75. My mother was born in 58. I am the first person in my family's lineage that was born with all the rights and civil liberties. Because remember, some of the Civil Rights Acts did not pass until 64 and 68. So that's how recent we are with voter suppression and the impact that it has had on people of colors, where I am the first generation that was born with all those rights and privileges.
Yeah. When we look at historical records, it's shocking how not so far back some of our givens that we take for granted now are. They aren't that far back.
And and how rapidly we're trying to turn it back, because I'm only 45 and we're trying to turn back the clock. Within 45 years, we're trying to roll it back.
Right. And it has happened in other countries. And I don't mean to be dire, but we need to pay attention. I completely agree. Mm-hmm. I read Heather Cox Richardson is a historian that writes a great deal about what she sees as some of the most relevant topics right now. And she named a name. I'm sorry, I don't have it at the tip of my tongue here, but she said, a writer for a national publication, probably a conservative one, said that we should take seriously the idea he was proposing that there should be fewer voters, but they should be better quality voters. Which of course is a euphemism for, let's just go back to, property owning white males. How about that? Mm-hmm. He was very upfront about it. And I think it's, to me, it's both alarming and also kind of a punch in the gut. Like, we need to see this for what it is. These attitudes have been around for all of the last, several hundred years, but they were kept in the dark corners. People didn't talk about them out front. For the last 50 years, at any rate, I would say they weren't talked about in public very much. Now they are being talked about in public. It is frightening, but it's also kind of freeing. Like, oh, this was really going on all the time. This was going on all the time. And we didn't see it. And now we are seeing it. So.
Do you think that we didn't see it, or that many of us were allotted the privilege to not have to see it?
I think
because from listening to my ancestors, we've always seen it, but we've always been on the short end of the stick of it.
I would agree with you. I can't disagree with that. Although I'm interested. If you grew up in Kansas City, more or less. Is that correct?
Yes, a little bit. My dad was military, so we bounced around, but I was born here.
All right. So, and I grew up in a very rural area. So it was just like, it was a topic, but it was a national topic that didn't affect me much. So that's kind of how I grew up. But what did your growing up, like the schools and your family conversations or community conversations, what was the discussion about voting and your community, Black people in general, and your community specifically? What did you learn? What came to you? You probably are learning things you didn't know either now, I suppose.
I'm learning lots of things that I didn't know, but I also learned it was instilled in us very early that the right we had to vote, that people had literally lost their lives for us to do so. So it didn't matter what we were voting on. If we were voting on what was going to be the ice cream flavor of the neighborhood, you go participate in the vote, because there was a time when you literally could not and were killed for trying to do so. So that's how I was raised with it. So I don't care what we're voting on. I always go and vote. And I often take my children with me to go and vote to get them into the practice that this is a privilege that people who look like us literally died for us to have. We cannot take this for granted because at some point people can try and are actively now trying to remove that privilege from us.
Right, exactly. And for
Mhm.
every hero or shero that stands up and fights for that right,
Right.
maybe they're not equal numbers, but there are definitely loud people trying to roll the time back.
Hmm.
And I know you and I've had a short discussion about, I know it was your pop-up this week about women. And although that seems far-fetched to me, it also is not unreasonable. I have read that in other words, if white males granted through pressure granted the right to women to vote through pressure and some
Right.
believing it was the right thing, all
Hmm.
they could take it away. In other
Yes.
words, it's still who's in charge
Yes.
and who is
Yes.
the most in charge and who
Hmm.
has the most power. And some of you may know and some of you may not that the whole business of gerrymandering, which is happening at a state level,
Hmm.
actually could affect our future, even if you think, well, the federal legislature wouldn't allow this, but states
Yes.
are even more subject to a hard right voter suppression, as you can see if you read any of the articles about what's happened in Georgia since the most recent election. And that is where some of this pressure is coming, is at the state level,
Mhm.
and could continue. And it's like we have to pay attention. I don't know the answers. I just know I'm trying to pay attention.
Yes. And you and I had the conversation after the election and the demographics came out, and how it was astounding that to me and to many women of color that 55% of white women voted for Trump a second time. And so that is where, and that caused many Black women who had moved in circles and shared life with white women and raised kids and all those things to ponder, because that was another gut punch, because we were not included in the women's suffrage original movement.
I remember that.
And so for that to happen, for that same message to be sent again 100 years later, was powerful, impactful, and disappointing. And to me, also a bit disillusioning, because like I said in my pop-up last week, they had to grant you the privilege to vote too.
Right.
So if you had to be granted any privileges from white men, that means they also can roll them back. So to me, I would think that it would be a more collaborative voice, all of us waking up like, hey, you're right. We all had to be granted this. So we need to really be on top of this together. But that is not how it is. That is not how it has been shaking out. And that is very concerning to me.
And the numbers, you know,
Mhm.
you and I both know that there are white women who are true allies, but
Yes.
the numbers who are not is what's disturbing.
Yes.
And that's all we can go on is
Right.
it's if you say, well, there was only 5% of white women who still supported the last administration and everything that represented, but no,
Right.
it was far more than 5%. It was
Right.
55%.
Yes.
And so I know you've shared it, and I'll say it here, but it causes Black women who work with white women to wonder, how did my colleagues at work actually vote? And can I trust them? Or do they still want a white supremacy system to continue on as it has been under wraps, but now more openly?
Exactly. And that causes rifts in churches, because if you go to a mixed church, now you're looking at 55% of these women in here do not believe that I have a right to participate in society as they do. And that hits you hard. That hits you hard.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. And I know it seems like far removed, but I have read some stories from Afghanistan. And we all think of Afghanistan as being ruled by the Taliban this hard, conservative, patriarchal system that doesn't want girls to get educated and that wants women to stay literally indoors unless they're accompanied by a male, and all these things that just seem positively ancient and unreasonable to us and oppressive. But when you go into the history, before the Taliban took control, Afghanistan was becoming progressive and women were educated and women were starting to lead their own lives and were having some of these rights that we here in the West take for granted. And that was actually happening. And I just find that even more appalling. It's not like they went from bad to worse. It's like they went from we're getting a lot better to way worse. And of course, Afghanistan is where Malia was shot for promoting education for girls and women. And she did survive, of course, and went on to do her work. But it's a global thing. And we happen to be in the United States and trying to deal with what do we do here in the face of this.
So it can be a challenging issue, but I think the point that you and I want to bring home is that voter suppression is not new to America and is not something that is as far removed as we would like to think that it is. Because again, I am the first generation born with the full rights and privileges as a United States citizen. My mother was not. So that is something that we need to all keep relevant and in the forefront, because it was Van Jones who was talking about it. And he said, you know, the nation is shifting and many white people are having new information taught to them much faster than they can process, and also coming to the realization that their grandchildren may not look anything like their grandparents, as the nation truly is becoming multi-hued, multi-religion, multi-educational levels, just all these different variety and myriad of colors and lifestyles and everything is happening within a single generation. And so we're at a Y in the road. We really are at a Y. And it can be a wonderful, tremendous society that all of us are able to participate in and have a voice in, or not.
Right. Yeah. So if you're a white person listening, here's a couple of suggestions. Read some of the Black authors, listen to some of the Black speakers. Van Jones would be an excellent one. He's excellent at crossing the lines and seeing the big picture. Resmaa Menakem is excellent also. Robin DiAngelo is not Black, but she has worked across racial lines for years. Her book is White Fragility. She may have others by now. All of these people should have talks on YouTube. You can listen to them. You can begin to educate them yourselves about that, to where you have a better understanding, because the more of our real history that you understand as our viewers, the better off you'll be in developing what you want to do going forward from here. Now, do you have any suggestions either for white people or for Black people in the face of all talking about?
I think in general, for people of color, I think we need to recognize that voting is not a special occasion action. Voting for president is great, but the things that impact our lives daily and are the most immediate are our county elections, our city elections, our school board elections, and state elections. We have got to educate ourselves on those four on a regular basis, because that has the most present relevance in your life. Yes, voting for president is big, but your day-to-day life, those four districts there, county, city, what did I say, school board and state, impact our lives greatly. So don't wait every 4 years and be like, I got out and vote. No, every vote is important. Every ballot needs to be looked at, and every topic should be researched and discussed. That is how we change the nation. We have to participate fully, and not just every 4 years.
Right, not just a half-hearted celebration. Right.
Right,
I couldn't
right.
agree more with you.
Mhm.
I make myself go and vote. And if I'm unsure of who to vote, I check in. I happen to be on Facebook, and I know not everyone is, but check in with some educated friends. If you don't feel like you're quite up to speed, check in with some people you really trust, with whom you
Mhm.
feel like-minded, and ask for their opinion. There's no shame in that. If you haven't done all of your own research, at least work with people who have. And this week, on a happier note, Lee Summit brought in a its first, maybe, I believe it's first, at least a new Black board member for school board.
It's its second. The first one is a woman. I forgot. I think her name is Megan. She's a retired Marine. So this is their second African American ever elected to the school board. First Black male.
Yes, first Black male.
Mhm.
And he and I've had
Yeah.
several conversations, so that was good. And then some of the other school districts around the metro area are, we're in Kansas City for any of our listeners that might be further away.
Mhm.
But so it's happening, change is happening at the local level. That's a really important place for it to happen. So yes,
Yes.
vote.
And yes,
And-
well, and recognize that you will hear chatter. There has been quite a bit of chatter in Lee Summit. Not happy that we now have 2 Black people on the school board. So realize that there will always be resistance and reluctance to change, but we have to stay dedicated to it. Got to stay
Right.
dedicated to it.
Right. And I'm going to throw in a little PS here before we wind this down.
Mhm.
If you start studying the history, which is not that hard to do, Heather Cox Richardson is a historian that's tying historical events in the United States to what's happening now. And there are others that are weaving in the history. Every move forward that has been made by Black people or other people of color has been met by a massive wave of resistance and oppression and brutality
Yes.
soon after.
Mhm.
And I've gotten to where I see that pattern. It's not hard to see if you look at history, and you can just about predict it. So that's something to be aware of, that it's like if you get hit and the hitting stops and you think, oh, we're okay now, you have to know that the person who hit you is coming back for another one. And that if you got up, you're not necessarily up yet. And we all have to know that. White people and Black people
Yes.
need to know that and not be caught off guard.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think you're right. Standing strong, voting at the local level, being
Mhm.
prepared, not being completely shocked when those things do happen.
Right.
This is a reaction to some of the things that have been happening over the last 2 or 3 months. The people of color in all sorts of ways began to make some headway. And all of a sudden, oh, well, now we got to suppress the vote, as
Yeah.
you and I talked about a couple times
Well,
ago.
remember when you and I talked about the series Lincoln. That's why John Wilkes Booth really killed Lincoln. Not because he freed the slaves, but because he wanted to make it legal for him to vote. That's why he killed him.
Right, right. So the vote is a big thing. The vote is a
Mhm.
very big thing, and we need to treasure it, take care of it, respect it, and make sure that people across the
Participate in
board
it. Yes.
participate. Right.
Participate in it. Yes.
Exactly. So, well, thank you for listening. And Bernadette, you want to close?
We will see you next week. As always, start talking and keep talking. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.